Listener discretion is advised.
True crime can be strangely fascinating. This true crime is odd, macabre, and haunted. I'm Diane, your guide into the shadows. Welcome to Phantasmal Crime. David Gring built a gristmill in Berks County in 1811. Today, that mill and Gring's homestead are owned by Berks County and used as a visitor center and offices. In 1875, the Gring home would host the dead bodies of 4 members of the Bissinger family following a murder-suicide. A mother, Louisa Bissinger, took the lives of her children in retaliation for a wrong by the father. The tragic circumstances have left the ghosts of the family to haunt this area of Berks County in Pennsylvania. And then there was Ethel Major, a woman an ocean away from Pennsylvania. She was not happy in her marriage. Her husband was an angry man and their relationship had gone sour long ago. Rather than leave her husband, she decided to make the ultimate break. And for that, she paid with her life. She spent the end of her life at H.M. Prison Hole in Yorkshire, England. And it would seem that her spirit has decided to stay at that prison in the afterlife. Join us as we share these tragic tales that have left revenants of 2 bad marriages. Ethel and Louisa came from 2 different countries and 2 different time periods, but they both had the same dissatisfaction in their marriages. For Louisa, rather than murder her husband, she wanted to cause him as much pain as possible. Philip Bissinger had been born in Germany in 1842. When he was 3, his family immigrated to America and settled in Baltimore. He made his way to Berks County in Pennsylvania, and in September 1861, he enlisted in Company G, Pennsylvania 79th Infantry Regiment. Throughout the Civil War, he was promoted to Sergeant Major, and then First Lieutenant, and then ending at full captain. So for the rest of his life, he would be known as Captain Philip Bissinger. He mustered out of the Army in September of 1864. Shortly after that, he met Louisa Eben, and the couple were married in 1865. Philip opened the Café Bissinger in Reading, and he became an influential and respected man in Berks County. His professional life was successful. His marriage, on the other hand, was a disaster. Louisa and Philip didn't get along almost from the start. Philip moved his mother into their home, and the 2 of them were belligerent towards Louisa. The poor treatment was observed by the neighbors. Despite the unhappiness, Louisa and Philip had 5 children: Molly, Lily, Philip Jr., Louis, and an unnamed child. Louis passed in 1869 and the unnamed child in 1874. And Louisa was pregnant again in 1875. Philip, unhappy in his marriage, had seemingly replaced Louisa with another woman. The newspaper reported after the tragedy, quote, "The report commonly accepted is that Bissinger had bestowed his affection upon an unmarried woman from Philadelphia who was frequently at his house, and who was boldly accorded authority denied his wife. On Monday, as it is stated, a quarrel took place between the husband and wife on this account, and he ordered her out of his sight. He told her he would give her $2,000 to go away and return no more. She to keep the 2 girls, and he to keep the boy, and threatened to kill her if she returned." So things have really escalated here. Louisa was having none of this. Philip wasn't going to separate her from one of her children. This fight took place on August 17th, 1875. Later that afternoon, she left the house with the couple's 3 children, the group dressed in their Sunday best. They boarded a streetcar and they rode out of the city. This was a distance of a little over 2 miles, and the group got off the streetcar and then made their way down the Union Canal towpath to lock number 49 East. Louisa was carrying a basket, and she had the children helping her to fill it with rocks. The group passed the canal office, and she said to the office manager, "It is warm." He replied, "Yes, indeed." She then said, "We have to carry a basket and take the children with us." Kind of a strange and ominous sentence. I wonder what that office manager thought. When they got to the canal, Louisa tied the basket around her waist and then gathered the children in her arms and threw herself and the children into the canal. Louisa sank immediately and lost hold of the children, who all struggled to stay afloat. A witness saw Louisa make the jump, and he saw the children come up. He couldn't swim, so he ran to Gring's mill, which was nearby, to get a boat. His efforts were fruitless because by the time he reached the children, they were drowned. The bodies were recovered later that day. The children were Lily, age 9, Molly, age 6, and Philip Jr., age 3, and it was later found that Louisa had been pregnant. The bodies were all taken to the Gring's farmhouse near the Gring's mill. The father was told the news a little after that, and he was in the company of the woman who had caused so much consternation. The county was devastated. The children had all been adored, as they were often at the father's dining establishment. Louisa was well liked, too. She had carried no suicide note, and people found the act completely out of character. Captain Philip Bissinger was placed under police protection because people were very angry and blamed him for what happened. The paper reported on August 21, 1875, "Yesterday, the funeral of Mrs. Philip Bissinger and her 3 children, whose death by drowning occurred here on Tuesday, took place here. Intense excitement prevailed, and a very large concourse of people followed the bodies to the grave, the procession comprising over 30 carriages and not less than 1,000 people on foot. For an hour before the time for the funeral, the house was surrounded by excited people, and the excitement was so great that a detachment of police kept guard on the premises. The newspaper also reported, when the bodies were lowered into the graves, the people hooted Bissinger and made a rush for him. The police had to save his life. They threw him into a carriage which was shot at several times. Philip later wrote the newspaper that his wife had just believed rumors and that there had been no extramarital affairs. Fred Eben, Louisa's brother, answered those remarks by calling Philip, quote, "the murderer of my sister and their 4 children." The anger must have settled because Philip went back to work at his restaurant. He eventually married the woman with whom he'd been having the affair, Ida Sebald Rosenthal. They had no children. The Charles Evans Cemetery sits on 25 acres in Reading, Pennsylvania, and is named for the lawyer who donated the land, Charles Evans. The Bissinger family is buried here in a plot marked by a large headstone that reads Bissinger. In front of that marker sit 2 block stones that read husband and wife. These are for Philip, who died at the age of 84 in 1926, and his second wife, Ida. Adjacent to them are the graves of Louisa and the 3 children she murdered. But their spirits are not at rest. People claim the ghosts of Louisa and her children haunt the towpath near Lock 49. On several occasions, they are seen gathering stones, but vanish shortly after being spotted. Some claim to hear the disembodied voices of children not only talking, but also their cries for help. Charles J. Adams III wrote in his book, Ghost Stories of Berks County, about his attempt to try to investigate the ghosts at the lock. It was very late one night when this writer and 3 reporters from the Reading Eagle-Times ventured onto the towpath looking for the Bissinger ghosts. We kept our appointed rendezvous despite a steady rainfall and chilly temperatures. Trudging along the towpath from the dam breast near the Gring farmhouse to lock number 49 and beyond, we saw no ghostly shapes or forms. As the story of the Bissinger tragedy was retold along with other local ghost stories, we wondered aloud what would happen if we were to have an actual encounter with a ghost. We walked back towards our cars, shoulders drooping from the lack of success. We came to a spot directly in front of the Gring house when one of the reporters stopped suddenly. He clutched his chest, leaned against a stump, and gasped for air. His words were fragmented, as if an unseen force had actually entered his body. It was a scene none of us had ever witnessed before. This particular young man was not given to making a spectacle of himself. Any such behavior was more than likely genuine. We gathered at his side to help, if we could, but within seconds he regained his senses. Still, he was unable to describe the feeling that overtook him. He too had never encountered anything like it in his life. Was this a kind of warning? Was it actually the attempt by a spirit to enter the body of this reporter? To this day, each of us who witnessed the story remains puzzled. Olivia wrote, "Me and a group of friends went here after hours. Immediately before the bridge, there was a rock thrown at a trash can out in the distance. While approaching the lock, we saw lights out in the distance. After we arrived back at the bridge and we were walking to the car, we heard a distant scream of a woman. And as soon as we started running, all of the lights turned off. Really freaky. Would definitely check this place out." Bernice wrote, "I've been running at Gring's Mill for years. I've not sensed anything, but there were times I thought I saw someone out in front of me. I would get closer and all of a sudden I lost sight of the person. I thought it must have been my imagination. But now it makes me wonder. It was just recently that I heard this story. I still love going there. It makes me feel sad that something like this happened." And that's exactly what people describe, is seeing Louisa running. And I don't know why, because, I could see where they're seeing the children filling up a basket of rocks, or maybe even seeing the entire family residually jumping into the water or something, or seeing them in the water. But it's so strange to me that they see Louisa running on this towpath, and that's where people usually come upon her. And clearly this person out running thinks that maybe they saw her as well. It'd be even more interesting if she described that person that she saw out in front of her as wearing a dress, because you wouldn't expect somebody to be running in a dress, especially a period dress. And now let's talk about a woman who decided to off her husband rather than herself. Ethel Lily Brown was born in 1892 in England. She had a daughter she named Ariel at the age of 23 out of wedlock. Quite scandalous for the time. Her parents decided to handle the situation in the best way they could to avoid the controversy, and they told everyone that the baby was their child, and thus she was Ethel's sister. Ethel would never tell anyone who the girl's father was. 4 years later, in 1918, Ethel met Arthur Major. She was swept off her feet, and for a few years, things went very well for the couple. In 1920, they had their son Lawrence. They lived in Ethel's mother's house until 1929, and then moved to Kirkby-on-Bane. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Things continued to be fine for a while, but eventually local gossip made it to Arthur's ear, and he found out that Ariel was not Ethel's sister, but her daughter. After that, things went south for the couple. Arthur started drinking heavily and beating Ethel. He demanded that she tell him who was the father of her daughter. Ethel refused, and the beatings would continue. She soon found out that Arthur was stepping out on her as well. She decided to make a public display of it and accused Arthur of receiving letters from another woman in the spring of 1934. Most believe those letters were written by Ethel herself. This only further inflamed a bad situation. Ethel was profoundly depressed with all of this and found it preferable to walk a mile or so to sleep at the home of her gamekeeper father, Tom. Sometimes she even opted for sleeping in a garden shed rather than going home. For Ethel, things had come to a head, and Arthur needed to go. So she did what several other women of her time did. She bought herself some strychnine. On May 22nd, 1934, Ethel made some corned beef and seasoned it with more than pepper and garlic, if you catch my drift. Arthur must not have noticed that she herself didn't dig in, and later that day he fell violently ill. He went to bed suffering from abdominal pain and frequent spasmodic contractions of the leg and thigh muscles. He was in so much pain he could not speak. Ethel told him and others that it must have been bad corned beef that had made him sick. Arthur managed to recover, and he was soon out of bed. This was not part of the plan, and Ethel made sure to dose Arthur one more time with strychnine, but this time she made sure that it was enough. The following day, Ethel went to their doctor and said her husband was dead. She asked for him to issue her a death certificate and told the doctor that the cause of death should read epilepsy. Apparently at that time, the doctor didn't need to do a thorough examination and could just take a wife's claim on what was the cause of death. Ethel then saw the rector, Canon Blakeston, to arrange the funeral service. I mean, you gotta love this time. We are talking the 1930s. We're not back in the 1700s or 1800s. So a woman can just come in and go, my husband's dead. He had epilepsy. I'm sure it was a seizure. Can you give me a death certificate? And she sounds like she was, just very, very sad about the whole situation too. But folks, we know there is no perfect crime out there. You are always going to get caught. Ethel may have gotten away with murder if she hadn't thrown out the poisoned food in a way that the neighbor's dog was able to get a hold of some of it. The dog went into convulsions and died, and the neighbor knew that something was not right. A mysterious letter to the coroner arrived claiming that this neighbor's dog had died after eating something put out by Mrs. Major. A halt was put on the funeral, and a post-mortem examination was ordered to be conducted on Arthur's body. A lethal amount of strychnine was found. Ethel was hauled in for questioning, and during the interview with Detective Inspector Young, she said, "I didn't know my husband died of strychnine poisoning." Ethel had just revealed herself because the police had never mentioned the cause of death to her. Only the murderer would know that fact. When the missing key to a box where strychnine was kept by her father turned up in Ethel's handbag, she was charged with murder. Her reply when she was presented the charges? "I am not guilty, sir." Ethel faced a jury at Lincoln Assizes on October 29th, and a large crowd attended the trial. The jury heard the compelling evidence, some of which contained a statement she had made about her husband claiming she could not bear to sleep in the same room as him because, quote, "I could not stand it. From the smell of him, he had a disease." She also wrote, "He was a detestable man, and I feel very much better in health that he is gone." It did not make the jury sympathetic to her, and it took them less than an hour to reach a verdict. The Grimsby Telegraph reported, "Sunlight was streaming through the high windows of the court when they returned. They filed in slowly with grave faces. Men and women in the public gallery awaited the verdict, but there was a long interval before this became known. When at last Mrs. Major was brought up from the cells, she had to be half carried into the dock with a wardress on each side of her. One glance at the jury seemed to convince her that her fate was sealed. When she looked at the solemn faces, her face puckered, and then she broke into compulsive sobs. She seemed to have aged 10 years during the hour of waiting for the verdict. The verdict was read aloud, and when Ethel heard "guilty," she collapsed and had to be carried out of the court. The jury recommended that she be sentenced with mercy in mind, but Sir John Gilmore, who was the Home Secretary, did not care to show her mercy in the sentence. The sentence was death, and Ethel was taken to Hull Prison. And of course, keep in mind, this is a woman who poisoned him twice and made sure that it worked the second time. The Lord Major at Hull Prison, Auld Stark, sent a telegram to Buckingham Palace asking that the King and Queen consider intervening with the execution and give Ethel a stay. There was a lot of distress at Hull and in society in general at the thought of a woman, who was also a mother, being put to death. The telegram fell on deaf ears. The Victorian-designed prison would become the last home for Ethel, and it would not be long before she made her walk to the gallows. On December 19th, 1934, Ethel Major was hanged at Hull Prison. She would be the last person and only woman to be executed at Hull. The staff had to half drag and half carry her to the gallows. She was barely conscious when the executioner, Albert Pierpoint, put the noose around her neck. She died at precisely 9 a.m. She continued to deny all the way to the end that she had killed her husband. There are many accounts of prisoners and prison staff having strange experiences at Hull Prison, and most of those are related to Ethel Major. Her full-bodied apparition has been seen on several occasions, and many claim that she haunts the prison because nobody knows where she's buried. Even Find a Grave claims that her burial is unknown. But Hull Prison has an exhibition that features a burial map of the 10 prisoners who were executed at the prison. These included Arthur Richardson, William James Bolton, Charles William Aston, Thomas Seidel, John Freeman, William George Smith, Hubert Ernest Dalton, George Emmanuel Michael, Roy Gregory, and Ethel Lily Major. The document indicates where Ethel is buried, so perhaps if she's actually restless in the afterlife, it was because of the extreme emotion she was facing as her impending execution approached. Paul Adams writes in his book Ghosts and Gallows, True Stories of Crime and the Paranormal, "The haunting is well known, and despite there being no documented evidence, it was confirmed to me by Rob Nicholson, the prison historian at HMP Hull, that various prisoners have claimed to have seen Ethel Major in their cell at various times and subsequently had requested a transfer to another part of the prison. As well as prison inmates, a former prison officer at one time reported feeling horribly sick after allegedly seeing her apparition." So here we had two interesting and macabre stories, and also tragic. Is it possible that a spiritual residue was left behind by these murders? Do either Louisa or Ethel regret what they did? Are there spirits at unrest for this reason? And what of Louisa's children? Are their spirits still here, or is something residual haunting the Lock area? Have these crimes left hauntings? Are there revenants from 2 bad marriages? That is for you to decide. Thank you so much for joining me on this Phantasmal crime. If you have a true crime that has something paranormal connected to it that you'd like to hear about, you can write me at historygoesbump@gmail.com. I've been your host, Diane. Join me on the next episode for another trip through the shadows. This has been a production of History Goes Bump.